They thought I was just a tired old man who didn't know what day it was anymore. Maybe I let them think that. Maybe that was my first mistake, or maybe it was the smartest thing I ever did. My name is Bernard. I am 68 years old, and I live in a small house on the edge of Guelph, Ontario, a house my wife and I bought together in 1987 for $112,000 when the maple out front was still a sapling. That maple is now taller than the roof. My wife Diane planted it the spring we moved in. She said every home needs something growing beside it. I never really understood what she meant until she was gone. Diane passed in October. Pancreatic cancer. It moved fast, the way that kind always does. We had 4 months from diagnosis to the morning I sat beside her bed and listened to the room go quiet. 4 months is not enough time to say everything you want to say to a person you have spent 41 years beside. I know that now. I knew it then. But I held her hand and I told her I would be fine, because that is what she needed to hear, and she closed her eyes believing it. I was not fine, but I was not alone either. At least, I thought I wasn't. Our son and our daughter arrived within 2 days of the funeral. My son drove up from Hamilton with his wife, a woman I had always tried to like, but found difficult. My daughter came from Oakville with her husband, who worked in finance and talked about it constantly. They were both in their 40s, both doing well enough, both with houses of their own and cars that cost more than my first year's salary at the plant. I was glad they came. I was grateful. I was still sleeping in a bed that smelled like Diane's shampoo, and I could barely make coffee without sitting down halfway through. What happened in those first 2 weeks, I would not have believed if someone had told me ahead of time. It started small. My daughter asked if she could take the china cabinet. Just to keep it safe, she said. Her mother always wanted her to have it. I nodded. I was barely tracking anything. Then her husband started walking to the house with his phone out, taking photographs of the furniture, the appliances, the built-ins in the living room. I thought maybe he was helping document things for estate purposes. I told myself that. I was good at telling myself things that weren't true. Those first weeks, my son's wife asked about the savings bonds. Diane and I had some old Canada savings bonds, the paper kind, from the early 90s. She knew about them because Diane had mentioned them once at Christmas, years ago. I said I hadn't looked at anything yet. She said I should really look soon, before they expired. They do not expire, but I didn't say that. By the end of the second week, the two of them, my son and my daughter together, which almost never happened, sat me down at my own kitchen table and told me they thought it might be time to talk about my living situation. My living situation. I had lived in this house for 37 years. I had replaced the furnace twice and the roof once. I had built the deck out back with my own hands over 3 weekends in the summer of 2003. Diane had painted the trim on the shutters every 5 years, always the same shade of green, a color she'd picked from a card at the hardware store and called Laurentian Forest. My living situation was a house full of 37 years of a life I had built. They said they were worried about me being alone. They said Guelph was getting expensive, and maybe it made more sense to think about downsizing. My daughter mentioned a retirement community near her in Oakville. Very nice, she said. Lots of activities. People my age. My son nodded the whole time, which he always did when someone else was doing the talking. I sat at my kitchen table and I looked at the 2 people I had driven to hockey practice and violin lessons and emergency rooms at 2 in the morning, and something in my chest went cold and still. I said I would think about it. They left at the end of that week. The china cabinet went with my daughter. A box of Diane's jewelry, things they claimed she had promised them, went too. I watched the car pull out of the driveway, and then I went inside and sat in the kitchen and did not move for a very long time. I want to tell you about Diane. Not the way people describe someone after they're gone, all soft edges and no shadows. I want to tell you about who she actually was. Diane grew up in Sudbury, the second of 4 children. Her father worked at Inco. Her mother stretched every dollar until it begged for mercy. Diane learned from that. She was not flashy about money, never was. When I met her in 1979 at a friend's kitchen party, she was wearing jeans and a flannel shirt, and she was arguing with someone about the federal budget. I thought she was the most interesting person in the room. I still think that. We were careful people. We paid off the mortgage in 2004, which is something I was proud of. We drove our cars until they were embarrassing. We did not take expensive vacations. Diane brought her lunch to work every day for 23 years. People at her office used to tease her about it. She smiled and did not change a thing. She managed the money. That was simply how we divided things. I worked at the auto parts plant for 30 years, and I brought home the paycheck, and Diane managed what happened to it after that. I knew we had savings. I knew we had RRSPs. I knew we had the house. I trusted her completely, and because I trusted her completely, I never asked many questions. That is not a thing I am ashamed of. That is a thing I would do the same way again. What I did not know, what I had no idea about, was the box. I found it 3 weeks after my children left. I was cleaning out the closet in the spare bedroom, the one Diane used as her office. She had a small desk in there, a filing cabinet, shelves of the binders she used to organize our financial records. I had been avoiding that room. Going in felt like a task I wasn't ready for, but I went in. In the back of the closet, behind a box of old tax returns and the bag of yarn she'd never gotten to, there was a metal lockbox. The kind you can get at any Canadian Tire. Standard combination lock. I did not know the combination. I sat on the floor of that closet for a while. I was not afraid of what was inside exactly. I just had the feeling that opening it was going to change something. I am not a superstitious man, but I have learned, at 68, to pay attention to feelings like that. I tried our anniversary. Didn't work. I tried her birthday. Nothing. I tried the year we bought the house. The lock clicked open. Inside was a folder. Accordion style, the kind with multiple pockets. Each pocket was labeled in Diane's handwriting, neat and small, the way she wrote everything. I recognized it from 41 years of grocery lists and birthday cards and notes left on the kitchen counter. The first pocket said wills and powers. The second said investment accounts. The third said property. The fourth said for Bernard. I opened the fourth one first. There was a letter, 4 pages, front and back, in Diane's handwriting, dated 8 months before her diagnosis. She had written it before she knew she was sick. She had written it because she had always been a practical woman who understood that people run out of time. I will not tell you everything she wrote. Some of it belongs only to me. But I will tell you what she said at the beginning, which was this. I need you to know that I have been taking care of things for a long time, and I did not tell you because I did not want you to worry, and also because I was not sure you would let me. You would have wanted to talk about it, and I wanted to just do it. You know how I am. I did know how she was. I sat on the floor of that closet and I laughed, and then I cried, and then I read the rest. What Diane had built, quietly, carefully, over the years we were married, was substantial. Not lottery winners substantial. Not mansion and yacht substantial, but real and solid and more than I had understood. There was an investment account at a firm in Kitchener that I had known vaguely existed, in the way you know a thing without knowing the shape of it. What I had not known was the balance. The portfolio she had been contributing to and managing, rebalancing every year, moving into lower risk holdings as we got older. It had grown over 30 years into something that made me sit very still when I read the number. There was a TFSA maxed out every year since the program began. There were the RRSPs, more than I'd realized. There were the savings bonds, yes, but also GICs she had laddered carefully, so something was always coming due. And there was a second property. This is the part that still makes me shake my head. In 2009, without telling me, well, she told me in the letter, she explained her thinking. Diane had purchased a small rental property in Guelph, a bungalow maybe 12 minutes from our house. She had used money from an inheritance her aunt had left her, money I had known about, but assumed she had simply put into savings. She had quietly managed that property for 15 years. She had a property manager handle the tenant side of things. The rent had been paying down the mortgage on it for 15 years, and that mortgage was now paid in full. She had done all of this without a single argument, without a single evening of me second-guessing her, without ever having to defend a decision to someone who thought he knew better. That was, she wrote in the letter, entirely the point. You were not a difficult man to love, Bernard, but you were occasionally a difficult man to manage around. This way I only had to manage myself. The results speak for themselves. I read that sentence 3 times. I could hear her voice saying it. I almost answered out loud. I did not call my son or my daughter right away. I want to be clear about that. What I did was call our lawyer, a woman Diane and I had used for 20 years, whose office was on Gordon Street and who had drawn up our wills and handled the purchase of our house when we refinanced in 2011. Her name is irrelevant to this story, but she was brisk and direct, and she had always reminded me a little of Diane. She was not surprised to hear from me. She said Diane had been in to see her alone about 18 months ago. She said Diane had been very organized and very thorough, and that everything was in good order, and that I should come in at my earliest convenience. I went in the next day. What Diane had arranged was clean and sensible. I was the sole beneficiary of everything. The investment accounts, the TFSA, the RRSPs, all transferred to me directly, outside of probate, the way she had set up the beneficiary designations years ago. The rental property had been placed in a trust, with me as trustee and sole beneficiary during my lifetime. Our house, the house on the edge of Guelph with the maple out front, was joint tenancy, which meant it had passed to me automatically the moment Diane died, with no role for the estate at all. Our lawyer explained what this meant in plain terms. It meant that the assets were mine, not the estate's. Mine, directly and immediately. It meant there was very little for probate to touch. It meant that the china cabinet was the only thing my daughter was getting, and that was only because I had nodded when she asked. There was one more thing. Diane had left specific instructions in the will about what she wanted done if either of our children contested anything or made claims against the estate. She had documented in writing every conversation she had ever had with each of them about money, loans, gifts, expectations. Every time my son had borrowed money he hadn't paid back. Every time my daughter had received a lump sum for a down payment or a renovation. It was all there, with dates, in Diane's handwriting, in a separate sealed document that was part of the will. She had been taking notes for 20 years. She had been building a wall for 20 years, quietly, without a word of it to me, because she knew she had always known that this moment would come, and she wanted me to be standing on solid ground when it did. My son called on a Thursday in November, about 6 weeks after the funeral. He said he and his sister had been talking. He said they wanted to have a conversation about the estate and what their mother had left, because they wanted to make sure everything was being handled properly. He said he had spoken to someone. I assume he meant his wife, who said there might be assets I wasn't aware of, and they wanted to make sure I had the right support. I said, I appreciate your concern. He said, Dad, we just want to make sure you're okay, that you're not overwhelmed. I said, I am not overwhelmed. He said, we thought maybe we could come up this weekend and go through things together, the financial stuff, just to help you understand it. I let a pause sit there for a moment, long enough to be uncomfortable. Then I said, the estate has been settled. Everything is in order. There is nothing to go through together. Silence on the line. I said, you should know that your mother was very thorough. She documented everything. I would suggest that before either of you decide to take any further steps, you speak with your own lawyers and understand exactly what that means. More silence. I said, I hope you and your sister are well. I love you both. Goodbye. I hung up the phone and stood in the kitchen for a moment. The maple out front was bare now, it being November, all the leaves down and the branches dark against a gray Ontario sky. I looked at it for a while. My daughter called the same evening. Her tone was different from her brother's, sharper, more direct. She said she felt she had not been treated fairly. She said she had expectations. She said her mother had promised her things. I asked her which things specifically. She mentioned the investment accounts. She mentioned the rental property, the existence of which she had apparently learned about somehow. She said it was not right that she and her brother were not included. I said, your mother made her wishes very clear. I am respecting them. She said, Dad, you need to understand that we have options. I said, I do understand that, and so do I. I would encourage you to speak with a lawyer before you decide which options to pursue. I would also encourage you to ask that lawyer to look at the documentation your mother left, because she was very detailed. I said, I love you. I hope you'll call again when you're ready to talk like family. I hung up that phone too. I will not pretend that those conversations did not hurt. I sat with that hurt for a long time, over several weeks. These were my children. I had held them as infants. I had watched them graduate and marry and have children of their own. That does not simply go away because of what happened in my kitchen in October, 2 weeks after I buried the woman I loved. But I also thought about Diane, about the woman who packed her lunch every day for 23 years. But the woman who drove 4 hours to Sudbury every time her mother got sick and never once complained about the distance. About the woman who planted that maple in the spring of 1987 because she believed every home needs something growing beside it. She had spent 41 years quietly building something solid. Not just the money, not just the accounts, not just the property on the other side of town, with its sensible little mortgage now paid in full. She had built a life with me. A real one, the kind made of Tuesday evenings and grocery lists, and 30 years of going to bed beside the same person and feeling every single time that you were lucky. She had also, apparently, been taking notes. I want to say something about the letter, because I think about it often. Near the end, she wrote about the maple. She said she had planted it knowing she would not live to see it fully grown, because trees take longer than anyone plans for, and she and I were already in our 30s when we moved in. She said she had watched it anyway, every spring, the leaves coming in, the branches spreading a little wider each year. She said she liked knowing it would outlast her. She said she hoped it would outlast me too. She wrote, The best things are the ones that keep growing after you stop tending them. That's true of trees, and it's true of money, and I suspect it's true of people if you raise them right. I did my best on all three counts. I'm sorry two of them didn't take the way I hoped. The tree turned out beautifully. I folded the letter and put it back in the accordion folder, and I keep it in the drawer beside my bed. It has been 8 months now. My son and I have spoken twice, politely, briefly. My daughter and I have not spoken since November. I do not know if that will change. I have stopped predicting things I cannot control. I still live in the house on the edge of Guelph. The maple is going to bud again in a few weeks. I can see it starting already. That particular kind of aliveness that comes into a tree just before spring arrives, something in the way the branches hold the light. I drink my coffee on the deck I built in 2003, and I look at it most mornings. The rental property has a new tenant, a young couple from Waterloo who work in tech and needed more space. They signed a year lease in January. The property manager handles everything just as Diane arranged. Once a month, a deposit arrives in the account she set up for it. On the 15th, regular as anything. I went to see our financial advisor at the firm in Kitchener last month. He had worked with Diane for 12 years. He shook my hand and said she had been one of the most disciplined clients he had ever had. He said that like it was the highest compliment he knew how to pay. I told him I understood that perfectly. I told him I intended to manage things the same way she had, carefully, quietly, without needing anyone's approval. He said, "I think she would have liked to hear you say that." I drove home on the 401, turned off at Stone Road the way I have 1,000 times, pulled into the driveway, and sat in the car for a moment before going in. They thought I was just a tired old man who didn't know what day it was anymore. Diane knew exactly what day it was. She knew what month and what year and what decade. She knew it decades in advance, and she made sure that when this day came, I would be standing in my own driveway, in my own house, looking at a maple tree that has no idea how important it is. I went inside and made dinner for one, and it was quiet, and I was fine. She made sure of that. There is a maple tree outside my window that Diane planted the spring we moved into this house. I look at it most mornings now, and I think about the fact that she never expected to see it fully grown. She planted it anyway. That is the whole story, really, if you want the short version. I have had a lot of time to think about what happened. Not just the lockbox, not just the accounts, not just the way my children sat at my kitchen table and talked about my living situation 2 weeks after I buried their mother. I mean all of it, the whole shape of the thing. And what I keep coming back to is this. Diane did not build what she built by accident, and she did not build it by luck. She built it because of who she was, down to the bone, for 41 years without a single day off. She was an honest woman. Not honest in the easy way, where you tell the truth when it costs you nothing. Honest in the hard way, the kind where you look at your own family clearly without excusing what you see, and you make decisions based on what's actually there rather than what you wish was there. She saw what our children were becoming long before I did. She didn't rage about it. She didn't complain. She simply made sure that when the moment came, the ground would be solid. That kind of honesty takes a certain courage that I don't think gets talked about enough. It is easier to look away. It is easier to tell yourself that family will come through in the end. Diane did not take the easy version. She was also, and I say this with complete seriousness, one of the sharpest people I have ever known. Not in a showy way. She never needed you to notice. But the way she thought about money, about time, about consequence. The way she laddered those GICs so something was always coming due. The way she set up the beneficiary designations so there was nothing for probate to touch. That was not luck. That was decades of careful, patient thinking. She read. She asked questions. She understood things she had no formal training in because she decided to understand them. That discipline of mind is something I have tried to carry forward. I go to the advisor in Kitchener now. I ask the questions she would have asked. I am 68 years old, and I am still learning, because she showed me that learning is not something you finish. And then there is the thing I admire most, which is simply that she did not quit. Not when it was hard. Not when it was lonely, not when she was managing a rental property and keeping notes on family dynamics and running our household finances all at once without a word of credit for any of it. 15 years of that. 15 years of showing up every month, making the decisions, staying the course. I think about that when my own mornings are hard, when the house is quiet in a way that still catches me off guard. I think about the person who planted a tree she knew she might not see grow, and I get up and make the coffee. What happened in this story happened because of cause and effect, plain and simple. My children made choices over many years, choices about how they treated their parents, about what they felt entitled to, about who they decided to be when no one was watching. And Diane made choices too, every single day, quietly, without asking for recognition. The results of both sets of choices arrived at the same moment in the same room, and they could not have landed any differently than they did. I did not set out to teach anyone a lesson. I only tried to honor what she left me. But I think if there's anything worth taking from this, it is that the life you build in the quiet moments, the integrity you keep when it's inconvenient, the wisdom you develop when no one is grading you, the steadiness you maintain when everything around you is uncertain, that life does not disappear. It goes somewhere. It becomes the ground other people either stand on or fall through. Diane built that ground. I am standing on it. The maple is going to bud again. Any week now. I will be here to see it.